Somebody say, let it rise. Let's go, Jordan. All right, let's go in with that. Come on, Pastor Jordan.
Today is, don't believe the facade, but be on fire for God.
Preach that.
You about to roast all the way on.
I had to ride. But, yeah, Daniel chapter 3.
Yeah.
And the title of my first point is, what God do you serve?
Oh!
Oh, man.
Wow.
And in Daniel chapter 3, starting in verse 1, the Bible reads, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. It's kind of a mouthful. And verse 4. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, nations and people of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up.
Wow.
Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all nations and people of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I read this, I just thought this was like a very bizarre story. Like, I just can't imagine, like a king, setting up like this gold image and then having everyone in the country bow down and worship it.
Stuff's wrong. Come on.
It's just, I can't picture that today. Like, imagine like a stadium like MetLife and just an image of gold and people just on like knees, heads down, worshiping. It's just strange, right? It doesn't really make sense. And yet, the more I thought about it, the more I thought about what that really meant, the more I realized that it's not so different in today's society.
Okay.
See, what is gold? Gold is, it's currency, it's wealth, it's money. And if you think about it, no one today is gonna, get down on their knees and, worship their wallet. Like, if someone's doing that, you'd probably be diagnosed with something. They'd probably think you're crazy. And yet, what does it mean to worship something? To worship something is to make something your God. And if something is your God, it means that's what you live for.
Right.
It means that's your motivation. It's what your purpose is.
That's right.
And yet, if you were to go to pretty much any workplace in New York or any university and ask people what their goals are, what their motivations are, it almost always boils down to some form of making money for themselves, acquiring wealth. And how different is living your life for the purpose of acquiring wealth from bowing down and worshiping gold?
Come on.
It's not that different,
Not
right?
different at all, brother.
The same sin that existed in 600 BC hasn't changed today.
Right. Bring us there, man. Come on.
And that's why I think the reason sometimes people don't want to give their money, like Clifford did a great job talking about, is because they've made their money their God. And like I said, to make something your God is to make something the reason why you live. To make something your purpose. And well, why is it so prevalent for people to worship money? Why is it so common for people to make money their gods? What does money bring?
That's a good question.
Money brings, what does it bring? Security, comfort, and a pleasure that only money can bring.
Right.
And really, I think that's what all, worldly thinking and sin boils down to is a desire for pleasure. Whether that like sometimes it's a very obvious pleasure, sometimes other times it's a pleasure that comes from having a comfort, having a security in something. And the more you consider it, the less sense it makes. If you think about what pleasure really is, I mean, no one's gonna say oh, I don't like pleasure, because the definition of pleasure is something that you like. Everyone likes pleasure, right?
Yeah.
And so to say you don't like pleasure is just a lie. It is what you like to do.
Yeah.
But the more you think about what pleasure is in the world, really every type of worldly pleasure you can think of is temporary.
Yeah.
There's nothing lasting, fulfilling, or satisfying in the long run that the world can offer you.
Right.
And I think that when you even consider, money and the comfort and security it can bring, the only comfort and security it can bring, and my friend Greg just walked in, everyone waved to Greg.
Hey, what's up, Greg? How you doing? What's up, Greg? All right.
The only security and comfort that you can get in the world is going to end when you die.
Come on. That's right. Basically.
And anything you serve besides God is really the thing that you're making your God.
Come on.
And the funny thing is that God will only let you live that way for so long before either He's going to give you enough time to figure out yourself and come back to God, or He's going to crush whatever idols you have in your life and make you live back to God.
Talk about it, man.
And I think a really cool example of this is just in the next chapter over.
Okay.
So just flip the page. Chapter 4, we're in Daniel chapter 4, Greg.
Come on, Dan.
And so really, just to prelude what's happening here in chapter 4, verse 33, essentially the same king that made this gold image, he's become so infatuated with himself that his idol in his life is himself. He is his own God. And so, the God of heaven warns him and says, hey, if you don't, give up your idol, which is yourself, if you don't stop worshiping yourself and start worshiping me, I'm going to humiliate you to the point where you have to look back. Nebuchadnezzar, calls God's bluff like an idiot. And we'll see what happens here in chapter 4, verse 33. The Bible reads, immediately what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from people and ate grass like the ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High, and honored and glorified Him who lives forever. So, what happens here is Nebuchadnezzar loves himself so much, and he's the king, and he makes himself his own God.
Yeah.
So God humiliates him to the point where He takes his sanity away from him and makes him live like a wild animal.
Wow.
Can you imagine a king today just throwing his clothes off and running out and eating grass? It would it's disgusting.
Yes.
And you would lose all respect for that person.
Yeah.
And wow, he used to be a king. How far has he fallen?
Right.
And yet, look at the lengths God will go to just to get you to look back up to Him.
Yeah.
So today I want to challenge you. Think about what the potential idols in your life are. Maybe you don't have any idols now, but what could become an idol later on in your life? What are the things you talk about? What are the things you think about? What does your life reflect, and what does your life show God? Does your life show God that He is your God? Because what you don't want is for God to have to get your attention. Examine your life and decide today that you want God to be the God of your life.
Okay.
Point number 2, a reputation amongst the nations.
Hey.
In Daniel chapter 3, let's continue reading the story in verse 8. So, what's happened here is Nebuchadnezzar just has this big old pillar and he makes a law that everyone has to fall down and worship it, right? And so in verse 8 it says, at this time some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. See, part of why I love this chapter is I think it would actually be kind of funny if someone were to make a movie of it. There's a lot of scenes that I find humorous in the story. Like, the astrologers denounced the Jews. This is 600 BC. What is an astrologer in 600 BC? They don't have telescopes. Anyone can be an astrologer. Just look at the stars. I don't know, but they think they start coming and talking to the Jews. It says they denounced them. In verse 9 it says, they said to King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. And that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. See, now the astrologers are snitching on the heroes. In verse 13 it says, furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought to the king. You know, another thing in this chapter, like Nebuchadnezzar is like the most extra character in the whole Bible. Like everything that is super over the top.
Yes,
But here he's furious with rage. The three of his officials that he appointed, these Jews, aren't worshiping the gold he made. And I think it's cool here is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these people, these three Jews, had a reputation in the country for not worshiping the gold.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, what has to happen for King Nebuchadnezzar to hear about something? He's the king. He's on top. The king just doesn't, he doesn't involve himself with civilian affairs. He's not just going to know things just because they happen. People have to be talking about it. Like it has to be a conversation in the public for it to get all the way to the king. So if King Nebuchadnezzar knows that these three are not going to bow down to the gold idol, I'm willing to bet everyone else knew as well.
Yeah.
And it doesn't say that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego made like a proclamation, like, all right guys, we are not going to bow down to this idol. They never did that. It was just so evident by the way they lived their lives that everyone knew. They had a reputation of righteousness in their country.
Come on, bro.
Does everyone in your workplace, in your school, do the people in your life know what you stand for? Do they know that you believe in something bigger than yourself?
Preach that, bro.
Yeah.
Because very often you'll find that your reputation is seldom far from the truth. Most times, your reputation is exactly what you are, even if it's not who you wish you were. The best way to figure out what your reputation is to ask someone in your life who's like kind of in your life, but not too in your life, and say, hey, what's important to me? And if they say, I mean, you're a nice guy, you're a hard worker, good character guy. In all honesty, that's probably the extent of what you are. Because that's probably the extent of what your life reflects. I'm sure we all would like to, ask the person we kind of know, and they're like, hey, you're basically like Jesus. You're always talking about the Bible. You're just doing everything great. It's probably what we like to hear what our reputation is. But if your life doesn't reflect that, your reputation isn't going to show that. And I think God shows us talks to us in Ezekiel 33. Exactly. I think he answers a question that we can have to this.
Okay.
Because sometimes, I think sometimes the reason that our reputation doesn't reflect us the way we want it to is because we have doubt. And I'll explain that here in a second.
Let's go, Jordan.
Ezekiel chapter 33, at the end of verse 32, the Bible says, for they hear your words, but do not put them into practice. When all this comes true, and it surely will, then they will know that a prophet has been among them. See, the reason I think that we allow our lives to reflect our reputation in a way that we don't want it to is because sometimes we doubt that the things we do are going to have the outcomes that we want.
Yeah.
That's because that as people, as humans, very naturally, we can become result focused.
Yeah.
And it's very easy for us to think like, well, I mean, I would, share my faith with this person. I would, express my belief in Jesus to this person, but in all honesty, they're a lost cause, and it's probably not going to result in what I want anyway. Or sometimes we can see a challenge that just seems like too much, and it's just not worth the effort that goes into that. And honestly, sometimes you're probably right. If someone seems like a lost cause, I'm not saying they always are, but a lot of times they will be. But the thing is, that's not what God cares about.
Right.
He says, for they hear your words and do not put them into practice. God knows most people are not going to listen to you. And God says, that's not the point. The point is that at the end of the day, they will know that a prophet had been among them.
Wow.
It's not whether or not the people are going to listen to you, it's whether or not you gave them the opportunity to.
Right.
And I think today I want to challenge you guys think about what your reputation is, what you think it is, and then go ask someone and find out what it really is. And don't be, I mean, you might be very encouraged by what you hear, but don't be discouraged by what you hear.
Right.
Instead, listen to it, examine what you would have to do in your life to get your reputation to where you want it to be. A reputation amongst the nations. Point number 3, faith hotter than fire. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 3.
Come on, bro.
Alright.
Good stuff. Come on, bro.
And we're going to pick it up here in our story in verse 14. So what's happened so far? King Nebuchadnezzar makes his gold idol, makes everyone bow down to it, and there's these 3 troublemakers that the astrologers don't like. and you know, and then they told the king, now the king's mad. And they just got brought to the king, so now the king's about to speak to them. In verse 14 of Daniel chapter 3 it says, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true? Like he's like super hurt, right? He's like betrayed. Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you'll be thrown immediately into the furnace. Then God will be able to rescue you from my hand. See, what happens right here is super rare. And this time, like, if you went against the king's authority, like, off with your head, you know, he doesn't really think twice. But here he brings the 3 in front of him, and he gives them an opportunity.
Whoa.
Literally a life or death question. Like, you either bow down to my idol. I don't do this for everyone. I don't give people options. If people disobey me, they die. But for you 3, you either bow down to my idols when you hear the music, or you die.
Yeah.
And he's giving them the opportunity. And essentially what's happening is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they now have the opportunity to conform.
Yeah.
But I think that they understand that to conform is to give Satan a foothold into their hearts.
Right.
And if they were to bow down, even if their motivation was like, I'll bow down just this one time, and they would psych themselves out and say, hey, I mean, God will understand. This is my life here. How else am I going to glorify God if I'm dead? Right? And it's easy to psych yourself out and tell yourself these things.
Yeah.
And yet they understand that to conform is to make a window for Satan to get into their hearts. And that's a dangerous game to play. It's a game that they were willing to play.
Come on, bro.
In verse 16 the Bible says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up.
Wow.
Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. This is what I mean when I say super extra. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in the army to tie them up, as if like they're going to resist.
Yeah, right.
And throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound. Yeah, like pretty modest guys.
Yeah, right.
That's why they need the strongest soldiers to tie them up. They were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, and the furnace so hot, that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace.
Wow.
I just imagine the 2 guards with these 3 guys approaching the fire, throwing them in, and just dying. Because even just being close enough to the furnace was enough to kill them.
Wow.
Faith hotter than fire. You see, they were pressured to deny God, but chose to be faithful no matter what the consequence. And they make a very fascinating statement to me here. They say with such confidence, my God can deliver me, and he will. They say point blank, we're going to be delivered. There's no doubt in our mind. But even if he doesn't, it doesn't change anything. And I had to really think about this, and I think what it is the reality is God isn't going to rescue everyone who is true to him. Because if God rescued everyone from every situation, Christians wouldn't need to have faith. We could just walk around with like an absurd amount of confidence knowing that God will rescue us from every situation. I think like if I knew 100% that if I was true to God that nothing could hurt me, I wouldn't wait for green lights. I would cross. You could have a ridiculous amount of confidence in everything you did. But God doesn't rescue us from every situation, because essentially what happens is Christianity would become like the ultimate insurance policy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We're in good hands.
And you can do whatever you wanted, and you wouldn't have to have that faith in God.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's fascinating to think that you have to have the conviction that any suffering we have here on earth is worth enduring in order to get our eternal prize. Because they understood that, man, what's the blazing furnace? It's a terrible way to die, but death is inevitable.
Yes.
See, life is fair to everyone in that everyone is subject to 24 hours a day.
Yep.
And that is true for everybody. And then we're also all subject to death, and we never know when.
Yeah.
That is constant for everyone on earth. Whether you're born rich or poor, you're given your mortality, and you're given 24 hours a day.
Yep.
So, what is a blazing furnace? Terrible way to die, but death is inevitable anyway.
Yep.
And they understood that even if God did not rescue them, it was worth enduring because they knew God still loved them, God still had plans for them, and they knew that they would still have eternity with God.
That's right.
Preach.
Go, Luke.
Like I said, pain and pleasure. Pain is something that you're going to have to go through either way. You can either have your worldly pleasures that will only result in pain. You know, you think about all the worldly pleasures we have today. There are people at my school who they believe the only reason they are alive is to have sex. And you don't know how you know it. I know it's their God because it's the only thing they talk about. The only thing they think about. Everything they do is down the avenue because they want to have sex. And they enjoy that temporary pleasure, but the reality is 1 in every 4 college students have an STD.
Yeah. Yes.
1 in every 6 women in America will be raped.
Yep.
There's a pain that comes with the pleasures that
Yeah.
people substitute their salvation for.
Right.
Yeah.
You're right. Come on.
And whether you go through
Come on, bro.
the temporary pleasures of the world and experience the earthly pains later, or you go through the godly pains of growing, of enduring and fighting, and then you can have the fruit of a righteous pleasure, a satisfaction of knowing who you are, not having to doubt, having the family that God gives us.
Yeah.
Either way there's going to be pain, and either way there's going to be pleasure, but you get to choose what kind of pleasure you want.
Right.
A lasting or temporary. You can understand whether you want to have a bitter pain or a productive pain. A pain that will help you grow.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Good stuff.
And I want us to all have the conviction here that I think it's fascinating I think it's really cool how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are, they're given this opportunity to conform, and I think that it was probably very hard for them to get through this, situation. But I want us to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 10.
Come on, bro. Come on, bro.
Come on, Jordan.
Come on, bro.
Let's go, Jordan.
Because, honestly, it was probably very tempting
Jordan.
to just, pray to the idol once, save their lives, not have to get thrown into the fire. But, the Bible touches on this subject in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13. The Bible says, "No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can endure it." Not so that you can avoid it or go around it. That challenge comes later on in life, but so that you can have the strength to push through your trials.
Come on.
See, I don't think one way or another they were ever not going to have to go through the furnace. I don't think that there was any kind of outcome where they wouldn't have to be confronted by the king. Because I don't think God was ever going to allow that. I think if they prayed for God, I pray that the king never confronts us, that we does not worship this idol, and all is good.
Right.
I don't think that was ever going to happen. Because God understands what you can handle, and so He gives you more than what you can handle, so that in the hopes that you go to Him for the strength to get through it.
Yeah.
And while everyone was praying to, the gold idol, I have to imagine that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew they'd be confronted, and they were praying to the God of heaven for the strength to get through it.
Yeah, let's go.
Praying for a faith, hotter than fire. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 3
Listen, bro.
and finish out this story.
Come on, bro.
And in Daniel chapter 3, starting in verse 24. So they just got thrown into the fire, right? The guards just died, and now plop, they're in this big old industrial furnace.
Yeah.
And then in verse 24 it says, Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? As if he just forgot how many men he sent to
Yeah,
right. They replied, Certainly, your majesty. He said, Look, I see 4 men rocking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the son of the gods.
Wow.
Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace. I'm assuming that he turned it down from the 7 times hotter than usual. Like for his guards, he didn't care, but I'm sure he turned it down. Right?
No, turn it down.
Yeah. He approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego it's super extra, right?
Right.
Be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way. This last part's cool. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon.
That's what I'm talking about.
Hey, if you want that promotion at work, path faith in God, right?
Yes.
Obviously, the thing that jumps out at you right away is, who's the 4th man? The son of the. I mean, it was obvious to everyone that it was, something supernatural. Like, he looks like the son of the gods. Like, I thought about this. I don't know what I would look at, and that would tell me that looks like the son of the gods.
Yeah.
I don't know what they would have to see to say that. Yeah, it was obvious to everyone that there was something divine happening.
Yes.
And I read into this a little bit, and there's really no way to determine whether or not it was a pre-incarnate of Jesus Christ, I think, or, say that it's probably an angel. Either way, it was obvious that God had used his hand to save them.
Yep. Yeah.
Just as their faith said he would. And I think also a very interesting point in the story is, if you notice, before they went in, it talks about all their clothes, right? Like they had the robe, the trousers, the turban, all this very common stuff. They came out with all the same things. The only thing that they no longer had was the chains and the ropes that bound them. Those were the only things that were burnt. And I think that's because if God wants you to be free, there's no human that can take that away from you.
Yeah.
Because very oftentimes people will try to, restrict you, put barriers on what you can do, try to tie you up and, not allow you to perform in the ways God wants you to. And I think oftentimes the most common culprit is yourself.
Yeah.
I think you are often the one that places those barriers and restricts yourself to what you can do. I hear all the time oh man, I can't do that. And no one's telling you you can't. It's just your own mind telling you what the extent of your abilities are. And we forget that the same God that has the power to drop, think about this, 3 people into a scorching fire, and somehow none of their clothes were burned, none of their skin, their hair, but their ropes were completely gone. This is, this, no science can explain this. It's something that transcends our understanding of, how fire works, how what heat is. It doesn't make sense that the ropes could be completely disintegrated and yet nothing would be burned.
Yeah.
It's something beyond what we can understand. It's a power beyond our comprehension.
Amen.
And I think oftentimes, although we restrict ourselves, we forget that we have access to that same power each and every single day as Christians.
Yeah.
How crazy is it that we can find that same power that was able to burn the ropes without touching the people, the same power is able to send a fourth man that looked to everyone like the son of the gods, and we can go to that power each and every single morning.
Yep.
Yeah.
How ridiculous would it be to say out loud, see, I have this infinite power that I can't fully understand, but I think today I'm going to have to take my 20 extra minutes of sleep in the morning over that. You would never say that out loud because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And yet the way we come in contact with this power is through our relationship with God.
Yeah.
And what does that look like? The way we build our relationship with God is through prayer and reading the Bible.
Come on, bro.
It's such a simple system, and yet we can psych ourselves out and really restrict ourselves from having power that God wants to give us
Yeah, come on, bro.
by deciding that getting to work early is more important than that.
Bro.
Like how prideful do you have to be to think that your strength is enough to get you through the day? It might honestly be for that day. And when you feel good at the end of that day, you'll think that you can go the next day the same way you did.
Yep.
And little by little, you'll find that you'll start to conform. I think that the reason Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't conform, they didn't allow their line in the sand to be pushed back by the king, is because they were in prayer. They were in their word. They were strong in a relationship with God. So that strength, the same strength that cut the restraints off their wrists, was in them, because they had come in contact with that power through their relationship with God.
Come on, bro.
And I think, being in that strong relationship brings so much to the table.
Amen.
Everything that you're aspiring to do, all the things that you want to have your confidence in, but that you put these restraints on yourself. The only way to break free from that is with that power, the power that we can get from God of faith that brings freedom. So I want us to understand today. I want us to think about and consider, what God do we serve? What are the things you talk about? What are the things you think about? What are the things that people see in your life? What is your reputation? What do you want it to be? What do you have to do in your life to get yourself there?
Right.
Do you have a faith hotter than fire? A conviction that even if God doesn't rescue you from the trials He's putting you through, that it'll be worth enduring for the final prize you'll receive? Do you have a faith that brings freedom? A faith in the power that God can give us by going to Him each and every day?
Yeah.
Let us be determined to be true to God no matter what the situation, because His power is beyond our comprehension.
Hey man. So what are you gonna do with this information?
Apply.
I had to ask myself, what am I gonna do? I remember being challenged to go and ask people, what is my reputation? And Jordan was 6 years old, and I had been away from the church for 3 years, and that's what really he had witnessed in my life, not really being close to God. But I really wanted to be close to God. And so one of the first challenges I got was to go and ask people that knew me. So I thought I would start with my 6-year-old, because that's probably the safest bet there. And I said, what are the 3 things that I like? What are the 3 things that you see in my life? And he said, well, I know you like the couch, and you like the Lakers, and you like to watch movies.
Dang!
Hey.
That was my reputation from a 6-year-old who saw me every day. And so it's convicting, and it's something you should do in your life, because it's a mirror of who you are. But I think the first thing you got to do is go, okay, what are my idols? Obviously the Lakers were my idols, right? I was an idol, my own pleasure, my own comfort, and that's always what it is. It comes down to self. The things in your life that are not God's will. And so the opportunity to conform, wow. Like Satan every day gives me an opportunity to take self over God's will. Every day I have that opportunity. And which one am I going to take? And then the last point about having a faith hotter than fire, I thought, these guys are a great example. They totally had faith, and because of their stance, they converted a king.
Yep.
And then the king converted the whole nation. And I thought, wow, that is amazing. And so, really, the Old Testament is a physical representation of the spiritual truths of today.
Right.
And if there was no linear time, really the whole world would be on fire. Because that's what it says in Thessalonians. There's going to come a time when the whole world is just on fire. And he's going to burn everything down. The only ones that are going to survive are the ones that have faith. And so if you can imagine that everything around us is on fire, and the only way they can be saved is to have faith in that fourth guy, in God and in his power.
Come on.
And he's calling us to be those people and to bring people to that realization. And so that's really the call for myself.
Right.
Like, what am I doing with myself? If I really saw that everyone is getting an opportunity to have, to conform. Like every day, everyone wakes up and has an opportunity to conform. And really that leads to destruction. And God has given us the answers. Like, what are we going to do with that? And really that's the challenge. Are we going to be about the Great Commission? Because that's why Jesus came. His last words were, go and make disciples of all nations. Why? Because the whole world is going to burn up. Just like that fire, 7 degrees hotter. And so for us, we have this great opportunity to go out and make disciples and help them be able to go through life. Yes, there's going to be painful times. But those painful times, when we go through them faithfully, it gives other people faith.
Amen.
So when times come at you and they're hard and they're tough, but you're faithful, your faith inspires other people to come to God.
Amen.
And so I really appreciate the lesson. Thank you so much, Swann. At this time, let's all stand up and we'll sing one final song, Go Make Disciples.
Come on.
As you get ready for the rest of the day, let's turn to song number 214.